What's up YouTube, and welcome to another draw along with me. Today we've got this whale design. Now there's a few requirements in the description down below, and the canvas size for today is 2000 by 2000. Now I have included a stencil in the requirements down below so you can follow along with the same design as the whale, just to make life a little bit easier for everybody. If you're new here, I post Procreate content every single week, so hit that subscribe button down below, and if you want even more tutorials from me, I'll throw up the latest 3 that I've been posting over on my Patreon. If you want to support me on Patreon, you get access to even more tutorials every single month, as well as sneak peeks, early access and merch. There'll be a link again in the description down below. And if you're interested in any of the equipment I use throughout this tutorial, the Sketchboard Pro that you can use code JoelCreate for 10% off, the Paperlike screen cover, or the pen tips grip and glove, there's links to everything in the description down below. And with all that said, let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, the first thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and add the stencil in. So for this, you need to download the PNG image in the description. And then to do that, we're going to go up to our actions. We're going to go to the option of add, and then we're going to go to the option of insert a photo. So once we tap on that, it'll open up our gallery. And then once you've found the image, which is here, slightly opaque, but we've got the stencil here, you can simply tap on it and you can drop it into your canvas. Now it should drop it perfectly in the center, but if it doesn't for a minute, just drag it upwards and make sure you hit those 2 vertical and horizontal lines. And to do that, you go down to snapping and turn on snapping. So now we've got our stencil, let's go ahead and start adding all the other content. So let's go to our layers. First thing we're going to want to go ahead and do is change the background color. If we tap on background color, we're going to want to select this color here in the top left of our palette. It's a nice light blue. Hit done when you're done. We're then going to go ahead and create a new layer and drag it underneath our stencil. We're then going to go to our colors and double tap in the top left hand corner to select white. We're then going to go to our brush library, and under calligraphy we're going to use the monoline brush. It doesn't matter what your brush size is, we're just going to simply draw in a circle in the middle of the screen and then hold your pen and pop your finger on the screen to get a perfect circle. You want to be slightly wider than our stencil there. So something roughly around about that sort of size looks pretty good. And then drag and drop your colour in. And if you grab your cursor, you're going to want to position that in the centre of your design. So hitting the orange vertical and horizontal lines. Again, turning that on with snapping at the bottom of the screen. And tap on your cursor when you're done. We're then going to go ahead and go to our layers. We're going to swipe on that circle to the left hand side and duplicate it. We're going to go to our colours. We're going to grab this blue here, the 4th blue in that selection, and drag it into that space. Then grab your cursor, and with the uniform option selected, scale that down, and then we can position it so we get a nice outer white circle. So I'm going to scale mine down a little bit, and then again hit those orange lines to let us know we're nice and central. You can maybe go a tiny bit smaller than that. And now we've got the basis, we can go ahead and fill it in with more detail. So the first thing we're going to want to go ahead and do is add in the water. Now we are going to clip a lot of layers to this blue circle here. So you're just going to need to understand that everything's clipped and bear in mind the stack. So let's go ahead and create a new layer. We're going to tap on that layer and clipping mask it. So now it's clipped to the blue circle. So now anything we draw will only be visible within the space of the blue circle. We're then going to go to our colors. And the first one we're going to select is the 3rd color on that row. So the 3rd color along. We're then going to go ahead and with the monoline brush still, slightly lower than halfway, so roughly around about here, we're going to draw straight across the screen and then pop your finger on the screen to get a perfectly straight line. And then you want to just position that so that it just goes underneath the fin. So you're going to want to move that up and just to there so you can see the gap I've got here. We're then going to go ahead and then from our end point draw all the way around to our start point so that we've now got a space in here that we can drag and drop our colour into, and that's going to be our sea level. While we're working on the sea, let's go ahead and create a new layer again. And this is going to be the 2nd tone of colour in here, and then we're going to tap on that layer and clipping mask it. We're going to go to our colours again. We're going to move across a colour to the left, so we've now got the 2nd blue in that space. And then you can reduce your brush size down if you want to something about 40%. And then starting over here just in front of the fin, we want to draw in some waves. So we're just going to create some nice long swoopy lines and then go all the way around to your start point so that you can drag and drop your color into that space. And if you want to, you can maybe grab your cursor and just move that down a little bit, maybe off to the right for me. Tap on your cursor when you're happy with the positioning. And then we're going to do that one more time for another set of waves. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create another new layer and tap on it and clipping mask it. We're then going to go to our colors and we're going to grab the first blue in this selection. And then on the right hand side here, again, let's just draw in another set of waves. Now these waves are going to be slightly closer to us, so I'm going to start over here and just create some nice bigger waves like that. And then from your end point, go all the way around to your start point and then drag and drop your color in. And then grab your cursor and just make sure that the gap is pretty much the same as you made above, but making sure sort of the points don't match up too much and they're a bit random. If you copied yours directly, you could always flip it horizontally so it's completely random, and then that way you know you haven't copied the line above, which I'm going to do, and then tap on your cursor when you're done. So now we've got them in place, let's go ahead and add in some highlights on the top of the lines. So we're going to go to our layers and create a new layer. Again, tap on it and clipping mask it because everything needs to be contained within the circle. We're then going to go to our colors and double tap in the top left hand corner to select white. We're then going to go to our brush library and change it, so still under calligraphy, but we're going to go right down to the bottom and use the script brush. Now my brush size is set to about 35%. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start here and then with a bit of pressure, just let that wave run out. And then maybe add in a little bit of white here and a little bit of white on that as well. We are going to erase little parts of this, so don't worry about it too much. We're then going to do the same for the layer behind, but not add in quite as much pressure because they're slightly further back. And then just adding in some nice white parts behind. Let's then go ahead and fill that out completely all the way to the edge. And then let's just add in some very small little minor lines in here. And then maybe one in here too. So that's all you want to add for this, because now we're going to go to our eraser. We're going to tap on it and we're going to go to airbrushing and use the soft brush. Now my brush size is set to about 4%, so it's nice and small so we can get into these little areas. And all you want to do is start to erase the bottom edge of it. So we want to get rid of that strong line and just fade that out. And then you can go backwards and forwards on yourself. And be sure to just sort of feather out the end as well. Let that completely just sort of run out and run over the top of it. But you just want to add in that white highlight there on the top. You can see the difference between that and this. We're going to do that throughout, so I'm going to reduce my brush size again because I'm in a smaller space. And then just start to erase from the center. And if you think you're going to run into another area, just simply grab your selection tool, grab the freeform option, and then just simply draw all the way around the little part that you need to work on. That will then restrict you into that space only. So then when I go back to my eraser, if I start going really wild over here to the right hand side, it's all good. It doesn't run out of the space that we've selected. And I'm just going to feather out those edges, leaving some nice soft white areas. And then I'm going to grab my selection tool and then grab it again so that I can just isolate this one here and then join it up. Then grab my eraser and again just feather out that bottom edge and let that run out as well. Grab my selection tool and grab it again and then select this one. And we're going to do that for all the waves. I'm not going to skip ahead, we're just going to do that together so you can see the process from start to finish. Grab my selection tool and then grab it again. And then we're just going to keep doing that. So the process doesn't change per wave. We're just trying to do this now as it's a step that's taken care of as we keep going. Grab my selection tool, do the next one. Grab my eraser again and just erase that bottom edge, feathering it out a little bit. You can leave some nice and strong, but as long as you just sort of give a little bit of soft motion underneath it. And then grab my selection again. Let's do this one over here. Grab my eraser, just get rid of that bottom edge. Lovely. And then let's do the same for these ones out here. And if they're a bit further back, you can get rid of quite a bit of them if you want to, just enough that there's sort of an idea that it's back there. And let's do the same for what I believe, oh no, we've still got a couple more after this. All good. Grab our eraser, continue to erase. Grab the selection. And get rid of that underside there. Tap on your selection tool and one more time just for this last one here. So if you're not caught up at this point, simply pause the video and carry on. But otherwise we've got our little sort of nice soft highlights on the top of the waves. Now what we're going to do is go ahead and start to create the shape of the whale itself. So then we're going to go to our layers. Now for the whale, it's not going to be clipped because it's going to sit right at the very top, and that's fine. So we're going to create a new layer here. We're then going to go ahead and grab our colours and double tap at the bottom to select black. We're then going to go to our brush library and we're going to go back up to the monoline brush, and you can tap on your monoline brush, go to stabilization and then choose to change the amount of streamline and stabilization. That'll just make your lines nice and smooth, and you can see mine's at max and 50. And then what we're going to do is on that empty layer we're going to draw in, using the stencil here as a guide, our line. So I'm going to go ahead and lower my opacity down of my stencil so I can barely see it, and then on that layer I'm going to go ahead and start drawing that in. So then reducing my brush size down, let's go for about 7% is good. I'm just going to go along all the lines around the outside, and you can let your line sort of run off like that and then start the next one, and as long as you sort of run them into each other nice and smooth, it's all good. Starting at the top here, I'm going to follow the motion of that line and then come down and just flick that there, so that I can then carry on my momentum all the way down to the mouth. And then we're going to go around the bottom here. You can hold your pen down at any time to create a nice arc, and then you can be in control of your lines a bit more. And then this one here should then be the final one around the outside. We don't do the eyes and the mouth area, the white areas, just yet. Then we drag and drop our colour in, and then just fill in any gaps if necessary, but otherwise you should have the outline. Once you've got your outline, you can go ahead and create a new layer and tap on that layer and clip it to the black shape that we just created. And then we're going to go to our colours, double tap in the top left hand corner, which means that now we can draw in the white areas and they're clipped to the body. And then I'm going to go around here, the mouth, and just follow my motion of the previous line, the black area, and just let that run out, drag and drop my colour in. We can then move on to the eye, so just using that stencil as a guide, and then drag and drop the colour in. And then we've got our extra little bit here under the tummy, so just round here, and then linking up your shape every time so that you can drag and drop your colour in. And then you've got the basic shapes that we need for this design, for the whale itself. So then once we've added that in, we're going to go ahead and start to work on the sky in the background, and then we'll really start to layer all the effects on top. So if we go all the way down to our blue layer for the circle itself and create a new layer, the first thing we want to go ahead and do is draw in some clouds. Now if you want to, you can turn off your killer whale just for a second, and then we can go ahead and draw some clouds in. Now the easiest way I always find is if you go to your brush library and go down to the script brush again in calligraphy. I'm going to go ahead and all I'm going to do is just simply draw in a horizontal line and then pop my finger on the screen to make sure it's nice and horizontal. And then with different amounts of pressure, I'm just going to keep pressing and just wiggling my way all the way down to the point at the end, and then fill in any gaps here. And that's good enough for what we're going to need. We only really need the top area. And then you can go ahead and add in 2 on either side. So I'm going to draw 1 in here, pop my finger on the screen, and then with different amounts of pressure, you can see as I keep pressing harder and softer, it gets different amounts of pressure. We can maybe thicken this one up a little bit more. Let's do the same on the other side, so drawing a line across and then making some potentially different to the other side, so a little bit thin on that one, less bumps. And then this one here, let's just draw that one in and make this one a bit smaller and just make it big at the end, that's all. So then we've got our clouds. What we're then going to do is warp these so that we create a nice sort of flared effect in the sky. So we're going to grab our cursor, we're going to go to the option of warp, and we're going to grab this node here, drag that up in a straight line, grab this node here, drag that up in a straight line, and then grab the bottom, curve that down and bring that down. And there you can see sort of the shape I'm creating. That's kind of what you want to replicate. You can maybe bring that one in a little bit more, but something like that looks pretty good to me. We can then tap on our cursor when we're done. So now we need to go ahead and add in a sun roughly here. So we're going to go to our layers. Let's create one more new layer. We're then going to go to our brush library, and under calligraphy, we're going to switch back to the monoline brush, and we're going to simply draw in a circle. Hold your pen and pop your finger on the screen to get a nice perfect circle. Something roughly around about that size is good. Drag and drop your color in. Then we're going to go to our adjustments, Gaussian blur, and then we're just going to blur that out. And I'm going to go for about 15%. That should be big enough and bright enough. Grab your cursor, switch back to the uniform option, and then just make sure you hit that orange line running down the middle to let you know your sun is perfectly centered on your canvas. So now we've got our sun in there, we can now go ahead and start to add in all the effects. Now the brush you're going to need is the marble one, and it's in the description down below, and because it's a singular brush rather than a collection, When you go to your brush library, you go all the way down to the bottom to imported, and you'll find the marble 3 brush right at the top of your selection. So what we're going to do is we're going to select that. We're then going to go to our layers, and the first thing we're going to want to do is start to erase a little bit of the clouds. So we're going to tap on the clouds, and we're going to add a layer mask. So if we tap on it and add a mask, now anything that's showing in white on the mask reveals the layer underneath, and anything in black will hide parts of the layer underneath. So now color now is black, and all we're going to do, my brush size is set to about 30, let's go 30%. Let's drop that down. And all we're going to do is underneath our cloud here, start to erase and get rid of that edge at the bottom. And I'm going in a circular motion. I want to get rid of the very end of our cloud there. And I keep letting go because every time you redo it, you're adding in a little bit more texture and a little bit more erasing. But that's roughly what you want to kind of get rid of. We're then going to do the same for the one above, and just continue to do that for all 4 clouds, and then you'll start to reveal a little bit of this marble effect from the actual brush itself. And we want to make sure that the bottom edge of the cloud is completely transparent, meaning that it just sort of runs into the very top white edge. So do the same over here. And if you want to, you could do the selection tool depending on your clouds, just to isolate a cloud like we did with the waves. But mine are nicely spaced out that I shouldn't need to do that. And let's get rid of all of this. Make sure that runs off nice and soft. And you see a lot of that marble effect already there. Next, we're going to go ahead and add a glow here. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer. Drag it underneath your clouds just to keep things nice and stacked. And then using the brush and the white still, we're just going to, in the center, I'm going to increase my brush size to about 50%. In the center, just sort of add in a nice bright area here on the horizon line and push that all the way to the edges, till we create this lovely big space in the center. And every time you sort of give it a nice light coat, you're revealing a bit more of that marble effect, and that's pretty much the effect you want to grab for that space up until you hit the sun. We're then going to go ahead and create another new layer. So we're going to go to our layers and create a new layer, keeping with the same brush though. We're then going to go ahead and change that layer effect, and we're going to go to the option at the very bottom of subtract. Now what that would do is when we paint this in at the top, it comes out beautiful and dark. Look at that. And then what you can do is then go to your layer options and just tone that down roughly to around about sort of 35-40%, something in that space, maybe a bit darker for me, about 38. And you'll start to add in a lot of that marble effect up in the sky there right at the very top, and then you can just see if you need to add in a little bit in the gaps, but otherwise you start to really reveal that. So now we've got our sky nicely done in, which I've actually changed my opacity. I've actually just increased it to about 50%. We're then going to work on the ocean layer underneath. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our layers, and we've got the different layers up here for our ocean. And we're going to create a new layer just above the first wave layer. So we've got the 3 different colors. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to go to our brush library, and we're going to go to airbrushing and the soft brush. And what we're going to do is my brush size is set to about 20%, could probably drop that to about 15. In the center, where the sun's coming down, we want to just sort of draw in some color. So we're going to bear in mind the sun and that edge there. We don't want it to run all the way up, but we're going to create like a cone. And so we're just going to start in the middle and then just feather that out to the left and then to the right. That looks good. Just to add in a little something where that sun's coming down onto our sea. So really punching that out in the center there. And then we're going to go to our layer effects, and we're going to tap on the layer and then change it to overlay. And that should start to give us a lot more of a greeny sort of tone in the darker areas up there. Now we're going to go ahead and add the marble effect into this area. Now we need to add it to just each layer of the waves. Now because they're already clipped to a shape, we need to go ahead and do something that we can contain the design within it. So what I mean by that is we're going to go to our layers, and the very back layer here, we can't clip it, so we're going to create a new layer above it. We're going to tap on that layer and select the shape for it. That's now selected that space. We're then going to go to the layer that we just created above it. And if we tap on it and mask it, we've now basically created the same shape, but it's completely empty. And we can paint, if we make sure we're on the actual layer, we can make sure we paint within the same shape. So if we tap on our selection tool, then we're going to go to our layer options for that layer and go all the way down to the option of subtract. And then we're going to go to our brush library. We're going to go right down to the bottom and go to imported, and we're going to use the marble brush. Now you can see my settings on the left hand side. I've got 70% for the opacity, and my size is now 25% roughly. for this backspace, so that now if we paint within that area, we're going to get a lovely bit of that effect. And you want to get nice and light towards the outside, and I've dropped it to 70% on purpose so we don't press too hard, because if you go too hard you're going to get a really dark tone, and we want to let some of that sort of brighter tone of the marble come through, but it will get brighter as it gets closer to us. If you press too firm on either side, or you go too far to the edges, just simply go to your eraser, tap on it and go to airbrushing, and then with the soft brush, and then you can just simply feather that out towards the edges. If you've pressed too firm, we want to contain it sort of in the middle. So you can see that that's now given that really cool marble effect. We can then go ahead and move on to the next set of the waves in front. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to do the exact same trick. So we're going to go to the next shape, which is the next set of waves in front, and turn them on and off just to be sure. We're going to go ahead and create a new layer above it. We're going to go back to the shape that we want to mask. Let's tap on it and use the option of select. We then go back to our layers. We go to the layer above. We tap on it and we mask it to the same shape. We then make sure we're working on the layer and not the mask, so we tap on the layer. We go to the layer options and we go all the way down to subtract. And for this one, we lower the opacity down of the whole layer down to 60%. And then we simply go back to our brush, making sure we're still on the marble brush. And then what we want to do is just change the size of the brush, because this is a general pattern that covers most of the screen. So you want to just make sure that those lines there don't run into this space, so it looks like one just big piece. So the size is now moved to 33%. And I'm just going to stroke in that center area here, making sure we create some nice lighter tones than the layer in behind. And then you can push it right towards the edge, but remembering that if you do go too hard towards the edges, simply grab your eraser and then just feather that edge out on both sides, just so it sort of blends out as it gets wider. Now let's go ahead and work on the one that's right underneath it, right close to us. So we're going to go to our layers. Let's repeat the exact same steps. So we're going to go to the layer that we want to mask to. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to go back to the shape. We're going to tap on it and use the option of select. We're then going to go back to our layers and the empty layer above it. Tap on it and use the option of mask, and then make sure you're on the layer and not the mask. Go to the layer options and then go all the way down to subtract and drop this one all the way down to 30%. And then go back to your brush if you're using the eraser like I was, and then turn off your selection. And again, just change the size of it now up to about 40%, and then just start painting very lightly in the center, bringing in some of that texture from the marble brush, adding that in and pushing it towards the edges where we can. But you'll end up with a much brighter blue right in front of us, and there won't be too much detail because there's not a lot of color for it to apply the layer effect to. But you can maybe punch it out as much as you can by just drawing as hard as you can with the brush. But otherwise you'll end up with 3 different levels and tones of color. So now we've done that, let's go ahead and go back to our layers and let's turn on our whale again, which is up here in the sky. So now our whale is back in there, we obviously need to make sure we add a little bit of splash here from the right hand side where it's coming out of the water. So we want to add some white just here, so we need to put a layer in behind the second row back. So if we go to our layers, we can go ahead and turn the layers on and off just to be sure, and that's the blue layer in the background. So I know if I go ahead above that, we've got the marble effect. If I create a newer layer, it will then drop it in behind the second set. If I then go to my brush library, we go to calligraphy, we go all the way down to the bottom and use the script brush, and we go to our colors and make sure we're still using white. All we want to do is start to add in some sort of big lumps and bumps here, first of all, just to show some sort of splash and, you know, start to get a bit sort of pushing the color up and out and making sure it creates a big area. So once we've added in just this little bit here, let's go back to our little whale here at the top. Let's go ahead and tap on that layer and add a mask to that. If we make sure we're on the mask, our brush will be black. We can just erase a little bit down here where we know it's just leaving the splash. And you can, if you want to, go to your layers and turn off your stencil right at the top now as well. If we then go back down to our little bit of white that we added there, and go back to our brush and the script brush, we can now start to emphasize the water. So we can start adding in some lovely streaks. So if you press a little bit firmer with this brush, you will end up with a nice strong point on the end of it. And make sure you add some down here and try to make sure that they're sort of ununiformed. We don't want them to be too sort of stuck together or in lines to one another. Just add in some splashes as the whale's making its way up and out of the water, and then just pushing some out here and maybe a couple here too. We will add some more in a second off of the actual whale in a moment, but for now that's good for me. We've added a good amount of colour, maybe just add a little bit here, just add in some more in, just in behind this wave. And that looks good to me. That looks like it's coming up and out of the water. We've got some nice splashes there. Now let's go ahead and work on the whale itself. So first of all, we just need to add in some basic sort of 3D look to it. So if we go back up to our layers and go to the actual whale itself, if we create a new layer above it, and it doesn't necessarily need to be in front of the white, but it can be, so you can drag it above the white area. If we go to our colours, and in our canvas we've got black, white and grey, we just need the grey in the middle. If we go to our brush library and we go to airbrushing and the soft brush, what we want to do is we want to add a little couple of highlights. So the sun's there, so with our brush size set to about, how big is that? Let's go a bit smaller than that, let's go about 5%. We can just add in a highlight just on this top edge here, and avoiding this area here because that would cast a shadow. So I'm adding a little bit of grey onto the top of the whale, just giving it that sort of 3D look. Next then go ahead and do sort of down the back area here, all the way down, adding in some grey. We can then add in a little under sort of reverb highlight, just adding that under there. Maybe a little bit off the fin here as well. And I'm not going to do anything around the mouth, maybe just, well, actually maybe just a tiny bit, just to sort of round that off a little bit. But that's sort of the basic sort of highlights that we want to add in. We just want to make sure already that it's looking a lot more 3D. But once we add these effects on top, it's really going to come to life now with the marble effect. So once you've added that in, the only thing we then want to do is go to our eraser and then just reduce your brush size down with the soft airbrush and just get rid of it a little bit, just sort of around the edges. Emphasize this shadow if you need to, and just get rid of it a little bit more, just around those edges. Just make sure we create that 3D look to everything, and that's looking pretty good. We then go to our layers and let's start adding the marble effect. So let's create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. We're going to go to our colors and then just double tap in the top left hand corner to select white, and we're going to go back to our brush library. We're going to go to imported and the marble brush that we were using. Now it's up to you if you want to change your opacity, it's up to you sort of how strong you're being with it. But otherwise I'm going to reduce my brush size down to, let's go down to about 20%. And I'm just going to start painting in that highlight and the marble effect on that top edge of our whale. Like so. Just adding in that cool effect. It's going to sit on the top. Now that looks pretty good to me. We don't need to go into this space because that's casted as shadow. You can maybe emphasize it nice and bright on those edges if you feel like it, pressing quite firmly there. Now let's go ahead and add the blue that's going to sit underneath. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to tap on that layer and clipping mask it. And then I'm going to increase the opacity back up to 100%. And I'm going to just change the brush size so that the pattern doesn't match up to the one above. So I'm going to go to maybe 26%, something like that. And then we're going to go ahead and paint the bottom edge. So just round here, round the mouth and round this fin here. And you can see some of that marble effect coming through. I'm pressing quite firm on the very outside edge just to really emphasize those colors. And then I'm going to come up here, up the bottom side under the belly, and then just push that up and in a little bit, getting very light into here, but just adding in a nice little bit of color under there, all the way down to the very bottom. And then just make sure you're happy with the amount of color you've added. You may want to add in a little bit more slightly higher up, but just to add in a bit more of that marble effect really. Now what I will do is I'm going to go to my eraser now that I've added both layers. Go to my eraser, tap on it and use the soft brush still under airbrushing. And where it's got a sort of a little bit too defined here as a line, I'm going to increase my brush size to something about 5%. And just very lightly just go backwards and forwards, erasing little bits just to really soften up the edges. We want it to sort of round the body of the whale, not sort of end up with a solid under straight line. So I'm just tapping multiple times in certain areas just to really sort of feather that colour out. Make sure it's not too solid of a line. I'm then going to do exactly the same by going to my layers and go back to the white layer and then just start to erase in here in the body a little bit more, just making sure we've not got too much coming down onto the body of the actual whale. But that's enough for me. Now the blue layer, we can really emphasize the colors of it. We can go back to our layers. If we go back to the blue layer and swipe it to the left hand side and duplicate it, and then we go to the layer options for that top one and go to overlay, and then we tap away and go back to our canvas. You can really see that blue's just now bouncing straight up into the bottom of the whale. That looks awesome. Now little final touches really. what I will do is we need to add some water that's coming off of the sort of fin here. So for that, we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer right at the very top. We're not going to clip it. We're going to tap on our colors and go to white by double tapping in the top left hand corner. If we switch our brush back to under calligraphy, the script brush right at the bottom, and we can zoom in and maybe just add in some little drops of water that are coming off. Now, your background may be too bright here, and simply we'll go to our layers. If it's too white, we simply go all the way back down to our layers, and it should be the very bottom layer just in front of the blue circle. Tap on the N for normal and lower the opacity down, maybe to something about 80%, just so that you can see the difference between the blue in the background and the white that we're painting in with the water. And then you can continue. If we go back to our layers, go right to the top, still on that top layer, and just create some little blobs of water. And you can create some streaks, you can create some blobs. As long as you create that sort of motion in the water, right down to where we came from, it's gonna come off nicely. And then you can press a little bit firmer on the sort of starting point of your blob, just to create some nice sort of thick water droplets. And then maybe some down here as well. Nice big streaks for some of them. That looks pretty good to me. Now there's a couple of changes I want to make, and you can do this on the fly like I am. We're then going to go back down to our layers, and we're going to find the blue sort of horizon line there, which is this layer here, and the marble effect that sits in front. Now for me, I want to make it a little bit darker, and the only way to do that now is if I swipe that layer to the left and duplicate it, we'll get another version of it. And if we lower the opacity of that right down, I want to drop it to about 15%. I want this area to be nice and dark, and that's kind of what you want to do as well. You want to make this one here nice and dark, and then as a result we can make this one here probably a little bit darker as well. So we go back to our layers, go back up to the next little bit of marble in front, swipe that to the left and duplicate it, and again the top one, just lower that opacity right down until we still get that nice bit of contrast between them, but about 15 or 10% adding on to that will give you enough of that marble effect in front. And then if we zoom out, the little extra touch we're going to do, we're going to go to our layers, we're going to go right down to the bottom. Let's add a shadow to the circle. So we're going to go to the white circle that's in the background, swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one out the two, tap on it and use the option of invert. We're then going to go to our adjustments, Gaussian blur, swipe from left to right until we add in a little shadow there, about 10% should be good. Then grab your cursor and then move it down to the bottom right so we get a nice little casted shadow under here. And then go back to your layer and lower the opacity down of that to something really faint, something maybe around about sort of 10% will look good. Tap away, and you'll end up with a nice little drop shadow there. And if you pinch with 2 fingers and go full screen with 4, you end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, drop a like down below, helps the channel out an awful lot. And if you're new here, I post Procreate content every single week, so hit that subscribe button. And shout out to all my patrons, I'll throw their names up on the screen now. If you want to get even more tutorials from me every single month, as well as sneak peeks, early access and merch, there's a link to my Patreon in the description down below. And if you want any of the equipment I'm using, the Sketchboard Pro that you can use code JoelCreate for 10% off, the Paperlike screen cover or the pen tips, grip and glove that I'm using, there's links to all my equipment in the description down below. And with all that said, I'll see you in the next one.